Well, I'm back here with Timothy Gordon, and we're going to discuss the political history of Pope Francis and also his recent response to the 11-page testimony given by Archbishop Viganò. Timothy, what was your initial reaction when you read that statement, the 11-pager?
Chills, like everyone else.
Yeah.
Not surprised chills, but chills. It's moving stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's run that clip in case people haven't seen it. This is Pope Francis on the plane. He's coming back from Ireland from the World Meeting of Families, and a journalist asks him about this 11-page memorial or testimony by Archbishop Viganò.
Quel comunicato. Ho letto e io dirò sinceramente che devo dirvi questo. A lei e a tutti coloro di voi che sono interessati. Leggete voi attentamente il comunicato e fate voi il vostro giudizio. Io non dirò una parola su questo. Credo che il comunicato parla da se stesso e voi avete la capacità giornalistica sufficiente per prendere le conclusioni. È un atto di fiducia. Quando passi un po' il tempo e voi avete le conclusioni, forse parlerò, ma io vorrei che la vostra maturità professionale faccia questo lavoro. Vi farà bene, davvero.
I will not say a single word on this. And in the part to me that was most unnerving is he says, I think the statement speaks for itself, and you have the sufficient journalistic capacity to draw conclusions. What's going on here?
As a lawyer, this is the strangest thing one could ever hear, whether you're talking in a criminal law context or a civil law context. This is the statement of facts, right, which is a part of every legal document ever. The state of facts as alleged, you know what I mean? So the entire point since the Magna Carta of having a trial, whether it's civil or criminal, is to ascertain whether or not the statement of facts as they appear in the legal documentation are accurate. I mean, is demonstrating that this actually happened. All this goes to say, Dr. Marshall, that to say that by reading the statement of alleged facts, one can make an ascertainment of whether or not this actually happened is absurd. It's absurd. Like, well, did it happen or not? And you're the first material witness in your own case.
Right.
Did it happen or not? All we know is that this is what's alleged. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Now, I mean, what does this mean? Like, you have sufficient journalistic capacity? I mean, it sounds to me he's like saying, hey, you guys have always done your job to clarify everything I say. Go fix this problem.
Right.
Is it that open? I mean, what does that mean? I can understand one thing. I could understand if he said, hey, this is a bombshell. This is a big deal. This is a giant scandal. And I need to get back to Rome after this long weekend, and I'll be issuing a statement later. You know, it's such a grave thing that we're going to have a pause on it. Everybody could respect that. But this response, he even concludes, but I would like that you do your job in a professional way. I mean, what does that mean? It doesn't sound right.
It doesn't sound like all things are kosher here. But what his defenders at National Catholic Reporter are going to jump out and say is that he's admonishing the world's media to do due diligence. But I agree 100% with your characterization of this. This sounds more like let's hide in plain sight and let's talk me to you, the mainstream media, who have been very friendly to me, much more friendly than to Benedict XVI during his pontificate. I'm sure we all agree, or at least you and I agree. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like he's saying, I'm going to have a public word with this esoteric meaning, and I'm admonishing you, keep it up with the softball coverage. But I have no clue. I have no clue aside from saying somehow this is an admonition to do due diligence. Not very plausible in my mind.
So how does all of this relate to the way that Pope Francis understands politics? Is this something Latin American? Is this Argentinian? What's the background for these kind of responses to this controversy and controversy we've seen in the last couple of years?
The main cue comes from Henry Sire in The Dictator Pope. It's so central to what's been going on the last 3 days, that in a prefigurative way, he didn't know any of this stuff. If he had, he would have told us. The author of The Dictator Pope is who I'm taking my main cue from, and his name is Henry Sire. He talks about the young Bergoglio being deeply influenced by Juan Perón in Argentina, and he says that this worked a profound influence on his practical approach to dealing with large bodies of people, whether as Archbishop of Buenos Aires or whether, you're talking about Perón himself, who was dealing with, the nation of Argentina. And then the main rule seems to be not retaliation, lex talionis, not quite, but we should say, let me answer this way. Pope Francis is unpopular in Argentina if you ask any journalist that covered Buenos Aires and the Archdiocese. And he's unpopular.
And are you saying he's unpopular now, or he's unpopular when he was Cardinal Archbishop?
According to Sire, both.
Yeah.
And now he's unpopular because of his means of dealing with the faithful, the sensus fidelium, as Archbishop. And he would explicitly refer to this Peronist model, however you say it.
Yeah, we were debating before we got on camera. Is it Peronist, Peronism? What's the right accent? Just like I've been struggling with, is it Vigano? We're not used to this. We're just silly Americans.
Yeah. Is it a burrito or a burrito? So he's an explicit Peronist as a younger man, and his style.
Let me jump in there, because when Francis was first elected, we were a year or two in. I spent the first almost 4 years being a defendant of Pope Francis. All along, I didn't feel right about it. I was like, this is the Vicar of Christ. He's the Holy Father. He's the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. I need to work and make these theological irregularities sound good and fix them and defend him. And I was talking to a professor at the university, I won't share his name, who's a professor of politics, and he said, Dr. Marshall, the key to understanding all of this is Juan Perón.
He was
a politics professor. I've read since then, but at that moment, I was totally confused. I had only heard of him anecdotally.
Right.
Tell us a little. Before we get into that, just tell us, politically, who is Perón for Argentina?
Perón to Argentina was the strong man. Dictator is none more applicative to any man who's ever lived, even Hitler, than Perón. And he was a political opportunist, meaning he did not enter into politics, and arguably in a thoroughgoing way never assumed a real political position. Now, in South American politics are pervaded by what we would call leftism. This is one thing where you read these words by Sire that Perón was not actually a man of the left explicitly. Americans would disagree with pretty much all the world on that way. And I'm an American. I say, scope of government affects whether you're left or right. If you believe in a big scope of government, a centralized, powerful, energetic state, then you're a leftist of one sort or another. And so Perón never was explicitly socially conservative or socially liberal, at least not at the beginning, And he was an opportunist. There's a story of uncertain provenance. We don't know if it's just, urban myth or what, but his nephew and he went around for a day. He brought his nephew with him as he did his political rounds. and he went to a radical leftist, and he shook his hand and he said, you're doing good work here, keep it up. And then he went to a moderate leftist, and he shook hands with him and he said, you're doing admirable work here, keep up the good work. And then he went to a right-winger, from an Argentine right-winger, and he said the same thing to him, which demonstrates the point that Peronism is circumscribed by political opportunism.
Right.
And you remember, I mean, during the first 2 years of this pontificate, you got all these, I think, stupid questions, because I was a little different. I was at least mistrustful right from the jump. With the first comment I heard about, we're overemphasizing abortion, that's not a good sign. That's a very not good sign. So, but what we would get for those first 2-3 years, even from the mainstream media, is he's not a man of the left. He's being cast as a man of the left. Or, the guys at, some of my friends at Catholic Answers would say, oh, the mainstream media is casting him as a leftist, but he's not a leftist.
Right. Yeah, the New York Times is twisting, and of course we know that the secular media does twist things. But when you're looking at quotes, in context, or speeches or documents, it gets harder over time.
It does, to continue saying that he's not a man of the left, but he is Peronist. I'm actually pointing up the one way that this standard narrative of Francis from the first 2 years is accurate. And I think it's only accurate in the sense that he is Peronist. He was up until I'd argue Amoris Laetitia's publication, in which point his pontificate entered its second phase, a more outed, committed leftist phase. But for those first, whatever it was, 2 3/4 years, his pontificate was more political opportunist, with little jabs of, I think, his leftism. And that, when you hear people say Perón wasn't a man of the left, it ends up coming across highly similar to the public as Francis's little injections of leftism.
Did the young Bergoglio, did he have is there any traceable influence of Perón on his way of thinking or political activism or any kind of connection there early on?
I don't know if you get any, I honestly, I don't know the personal connection well enough. If you're talking Aristotle to Alexander the Great, was there actually any private tutelage?
Right.
But there was very direct, less than proximate influence from the one to the other. He was an enthusiastic Peronist, insofar as he supported the point of view of the Argentine strongman, Perón, which is, and this is what's really pervasive, and I think this is what you really want to hit with your audience, is the Argentine Latin American strongman deny, which is where it's really relevant. Power politics, attack brutally your critics. It was deeply informative of strategy and practicum for, let's face it, as an administrator in the largest polity in the world is the Roman Curia, when we consider the jurisdiction of the Roman Curia anyway. And so political lessons do translate well, particularly, I'm sad to say, the Machiavellian ones, So, yeah, this was a direct influence.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be fair to say that this is, is it Perón per se, or is this just sort of a Latin American way, or does it go back further than that? Is this just Machiavelli?
What a racist! Let me say that first off.
Is this a Latin way of doing things?
I think it is. I mean, I think this is how. Remember, we always skip right from our discussions of the third world to the first world. This is what's usually meant by the second world, is the post-Marxist Latin American approach to questions of practicum, like how do you respond when you're called out very publicly? I'm not envious of the fact that Pope Francis finds himself in this position. I'm also not at all susceptible to fugues of much pity, because if you did something, then you should be put in the hot seat. But what seems to be really, really consistent is the opportunism, the political opportunism of Peronism, particularly at the beginning of the regime.
One day you can be a socialist, the next day you can be a capitalist. You can be right one day, left the next day. It's just the constant acquisition of power.
Right, which you see when, I was thinking about this with respect to the negotiation that was happening between Francis and Bishop Fillet of the SSPX, which I was watching a couple years back. What did it do except throw the opponents of Francis for a loop? They were like, he's extending more of a hand to Bishop Fillet of the SSPX than Benedict, the one who wanted to reform the reform. What in the hell? Like, what is that?
Yeah.
So
everyone was scratching their head on that.
Yeah, and that's what I thought when I was doing a little more Perón research the last couple of days to talk to you. That's what I thought. That stuck out to me. That was very curious. It was a $3 bill. Why in the heck is he talking so? Now it came, and also like Peronist policy, it came to naught. Go. Have you seen a Fillet interview in the last 6 months? It all came to naught. It was political posturing. It was grandstanding, and I think it was a little bit of windproofing, to see what the response would be. Pure opportunism, power politics, and those are always partly inscrutable. But the part that sticks above the sea that we can read show this is grandstanding and posturing. Really odd, really, really weird.
So what does he do now that Viganò has published this paper and he has named names? There's a list of cardinals, there's archbishops, there's bishops, there's details, there's conversations detailed in this statement. It's really, if it's true, it's absolutely devastating. We have already, by my count, 5 or 6, at the time we're recording this, bishops, archbishops, 1 or 2 cardinals who have said Archbishop Viganò is trustworthy. This needs serious consideration. So this is a direct public threat to Francis. It doesn't. Does Francis think that he can ignore it and it will go away?
That's the question.
We looked at the clip earlier on the airplane. I'm not going to say a single word.
Yeah.
Is he scared and silent, or is this all part of some plan?
Like you said, there seems to be a fair degree of subtexting happening. I don't know exactly what it means, but let me say a couple things. The silence, and it hasn't been radio silence, but it's been 80% silence from the world's press, the main media, has been really creepy. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who runs one of the major apostolates now covering this, and this is Michael Vorse. I don't think he would. It's not actually a juicy conversation. I'm only bringing it up because the disparity of our basically agreeing points of view tells all. So I don't think he would mind me saying this at all. I was talking to Vorse, and he said that he believes that now, because the allegations are so solid, he believes have to step down, which is what he's calling for on his apostolate there. And I wasn't disagreeing, but my thought was, I want to be careful how I say this, but my thought was, I said, Mike, I believe the only thing we disagree about is the degree to which you and I believe that the media accepts Francis as one of them, and that will be betrayed by what their response is to this. So this conversation happened 2 hours after I learned it on Saturday. It was a text conversation, and I said, I think they might give something as close as they can to radio silence. So they know they're going to have to pick up on it some, but I also have this unique position. I'm a theology teacher to 11th and 12th graders. And to guys like you or me, this is, like the president being accused of this, right? In some ways bigger. But they were coming into class, and I was like, hey, so did you hear the news? And they were saying, no, what news? Three kids out of every 20 or 25 kid class were saying, yeah, I heard. That's very telling. So that's why I brought up my conversation with Mike Vorse, because I was saying, hey, yeah, I guess in that limited sense, I was kind of right, that the media seems to be giving him as much of a pass as they can.
Which kind of goes back to this quote.
It does.
This quote on the airplane. I'm going to read it again for everybody. I will not say a single word on this. I think the statement speaks for itself, and you have the sufficient journalistic capacity to draw conclusions. It is an act of trust. When some time passes and you have your conclusions, maybe I will speak. But I would like that you do your job in a professional way. Here's what's interesting about that. Then I want to go back to what you're just saying. When journalists ask a question to anyone, they aren't asking a question for themselves personally. Like, hey, tell me. They're interviewing on behalf of the world, on behalf of their readers. And Francis is answering to them. He's not answering for the record. He's talking to them as quad journalists.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's really troubling.
That's what I meant about the esotericism. And really, I hadn't thought of that aspect a ton before you and I chatted for 5 minutes before you rolled tape. That is outright esotericism. That's what it means. He's talking to them.
He's talking to journalists. Quad journalists. Not as representatives of the public.
And the way is the way you pointed that out to me is because you judged by the context of the conversation, and I agree 100%. The trust comment, I don't know if you have it there. What did he say about? He says it's an act of trust. What are you?
It's an act of trust. I don't know if that's trust in him or he's trusting in the journalist. That's an obscure thing.
That's weird. But either way, that's what I said too. Mutually, whether it's he's trusting them or they're trusting him, he is talking to the men and women in the room, not their constituency, their readership, which is weird.
I wanted to go back to this idea of Machiavelli and Perón. Is there a Anglo-American? In previous videos, we've talked about Anglo-American politics, Anglo-American worldview, how that relates to Catholicism. Can they fit in our judicial, in our public discourse? We kind of expect that if you say something out loud and you stand on that platform and you change it, you got to step down. Like, you have betrayed. Like, for us, that is,
True.
We always talk about politicians as hypocrites and, flip-flopping and all that. And we actually do expect them to stand by their positions. Is that not the case in Argentina? Is it because their polity has been raped by the likes of Perón? I mean, to me, I'm just offended that the Vatican or the Holy See or the Pope himself would be able to issue these kinds of statements and expect it to stick. And I'm just thinking, is that because I'm an American or I'm a Texan? It's offensive to me, right?
Right.
Do Argentinians not feel that way?
That's weird. When I was studying in Europe, this isn't Latin America, but it's a good bit closer. It's more a stone's throw from the Latin American frame of mind. There were much. I don't know if it's at the intellectual level that there's more infiltration by Hegelianism in general. That might sound like an egghead answer, and it might not fit, but there is much less trouble with, even when you're writing papers in grad school in Europe, even in the Catholic school pontifical system, I would notice a tension in my own paper, as a trained philosopher. You or I, trained Thomists, we contradiction is everything. Contradiction is the tell that you have a major fly in the ointment. And I would say, sometimes I'd be consulting with a professor, and the only professor that ever was like, yeah, you're right. You ought to pull out all contradiction. Was the American, Father Flannery, the Thomist. All the European professors starkly would say, oh, no, that's okay. And even their scholarly writings in class, they'd give you some of the papers they'd published, and I'm like, this contradicts that. So I don't know the extent to which, a Latin American mindset is pervaded by the same kinds of amenability to contradiction. But it would seem, just based on what we've said about Peronism and the other, Latin American dictators of the time period, and second world countries, post-Marxist nations in general, that there is much less discomfiture with, you just contradicted yourself. And also, to add to that point, there never seemed to be a lot of, I didn't know you 3 years ago, but 3 years ago you and I might have been having, it sounds like, a friendly disagreement as to what some of the contradiction coming out of the Vatican consistently meant then. And there seems to be a growing realization that there is such contradiction and flip-flopping, and really, I don't know if it stems from him changing position as much as this kind of opportunism that we talked about earlier. But I would say yes to the question. I think it is a Latin American thing. I think Anglo-Americans have a different idea about the scope of government and about the scope of consistency.
I want to interject here, because we can't say Americans or Anglo-Americans, because if I go to where you are in California, those Americans are going to have no problem with dissonance.
That's right.
And relativism. So
that's right.
And also, I can hear hundreds of Latin Americans screaming at us right now, being, I'm not that way, I'm not that way.
Yeah.
So, I also don't want to give Pope Francis or anyone else, a free pass by saying, well, he's Argentinian, that's how they do things there. Right? So ultimately, we're all humans, and as Aristotle says, the principle of non-contradiction is with us all, right? That's the very basis of language and grammar and discourse. So that doesn't get anyone off the hook by where you're born. I'm just trying to understand politically where this originates, and it's not infallible. It doesn't classify. Not all Anglo-Americans are just honest, truth-telling people, right? We've got our share of liars. It's kind of like St. Paul said, all Cretans are liars.
Right.
He's not really saying that.
Yeah, none of your readership or listenership should understand anything we're saying is actually loosening the screws on France. You or I are saying is loosening the screws. But the historicity and the cultural context, to use the phrase we all hate at this point, does matter some in terms of, it's a proximate cause. Now, human beings have free will, and that's kind of where the buck stops. The cultural context doesn't matter anymore. But this does help to explain in a remote causal way what might have lent to his early influence. One thing I want to go back to before we go away from it is what Henry Sire characterizes about Father Kolvenbach's report. Have you read it? The Kolvenbach report? It's fascinating stuff. I've just had a glance on his proposal for bishop, Pope Francis, young Argentine Bergoglio, rather. And the report was condemnatory. It was universally it was universal in its approach against. It was a vote against. He is unsuitable because of his temperament, and Henry Sire. Yeah, Bergoglio.
Is this in Dictator Pope?
He makes lots of references, lots of facts and figures in Dictator Pope, but you can read the Kolvenbach report, if I'm remembering correctly, just on Google it, Kolvenbach report. It's the Jesuits, Sire talks about this a lot. The Jesuits, when they were corrupted in the 60s, a beautiful historical religious order that both you and I understand was meant to be great and has been corrupted. They are masters of psychology, so they study Freud, they study all of the early 20th century psychologists, and unfortunately, it's become a big part of the Jesuit, the Society of Jesus, is, psychological workups, and so therefore the Kolvenbach report was informed by this Jesuiticality, to borrow a phrase from Dostoevsky, in that it really goes through young Bergoglio's psychology, and it lines up so perfectly with what we're seeing about the violent, strongman-like rejection of all dissent, and it just sounds like a description of what we've seen even in Ed Penton report. Remember the Ed Penton report when Francis had done, what was it? I think it was at the first synod in 2014. I might be wrong. It might have been the second synod. But Ed Penton did this report that back at Santa Marta, where he lives, they were eating dinner and he collapsed in a rage. Do you remember this? Because I did. He collapsed. He was so mad. He said, "I'll have the red hats."
I do remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, and he collapsed, and he literally fell over in his chair. And the Penton report, and we all know Penton is, gospel. He said that people thought that Francis had died, and it was because he was literally like Mo the bartender in The Simpsons says, he's choking on his own rage.
Yeah.
So this is not a good thing. I don't know how people got around that at the time, 2014. That was early on.
Another element in this Viganò controversy in the testimony, and I think it relates to politics and the way that a man orders his reality. By the way, it's interesting. We talk about politics, and I just want to make a side point on this, but Aristotle talks about ethics. That's how you order your own life. That's ethics. And then he says when you take ethics and apply it to a group of people, that's politics. We think of politics as being deceitful to other human beings, but classically speaking, in our Western tradition, politics is social ethics.
Right.
So we can talk about politics within the church because the church is a polity. How does this relate?
Yeah, quick point.
Yeah.
Quick response to that. That's coincidental because I taught that exact paragraph, book 1, section 3. It's right at the beginning of the politics. I was going through with my class right before we got on the horn here, and they were all surprised, and they were saying, Mr. Gordon, what do you mean? Americans and Brits, we have this crass, sort of coarsened conception of what politics are. That's low. For Aristotle and for Thomas as well, politics was noble. Not that all politicians were. They had the Alcibiades and the tyrants of Crete and all that as well. But ideally for Aristotle and Thomas, and perhaps it should be for us, this sort of kills my libertarian impulses, which are many. Politics is noble because, remember, Aristotle says that the ethics, the Nicomachean ethics, which we take to be very important because it is a preface book for his politics. He says literally the politics is what he thought was important. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I just wanted to jump in there.
Yeah. Okay, so related to that, what's interesting about Pope Francis, as we've watched him for the past several years, and then we read the report in Viganò, is the grouping of people that have become insular around Pope Francis. So, we saw the invention of the Gang of Nine, the C9.
Right.
So there's the College of Cardinals, and then there's this group of super cardinals, these 9 cardinals, and they're on the inside with Francis. All cardinals are supposed to be consultants to the Holy Father. Originally, the Pope the Cardinal of College was limited to 72 because Moses had 72, assistants, right? So it goes back to, and then Christ appointed his 72, but Paul VI blew it up to beyond that. But all cardinals are supposed to be consultants, but now we have this special group, the C9, and then we see all kinds of cardinals being favored. Those that are in, those are out. Those that are out. Is that something that's been going on for centuries, or is this something that's being applied more powerfully under Francis?
Well, in some sense, it's human nature, right? To state the obvious. Look at the Borgia popes. So it's as old as politics. The coarse aspects of politics we were talking about before, but it seems to have been made muscular and systematized, dogmatized, if you will, in the Francis pontificate. And again, I'm just borrowing from Henry Sire here. Look at is it Cardinal or Archbishop Maradiaga?
Cardinal.
And yeah, he's one of the 9, I believe.
Yes, he is.
His diocese,
he's a wreck.
is like the most corrupt single diocese in the history of the church.
Yeah.
If you have a look at it, and the other one.
And he's Francis's lead #1 reformer guy, point man.
I know.
It's ridiculous.
I know. It's creepy. I mean,
and he's the one where the seminarians, how many was it? 40 something seminarians wrote a plea saying that homosexuality and proposition is so bad in our seminary that we need help.
Yeah. I know. I mean, heaven forfend. Heaven help us. Yeah. No one that's sitting there at home watching this or on your laptops watching this should develop a callous to what's happening. On the one hand, I think it's a little bit silly when I was listening to Matt Fradd talk to Pat Coffin this morning, and they were both very honest about the honesty. I appreciate. They said, "Hey, on one level, this is just exciting," which the only reason that's refreshing to hear is because some people are wringing their hands over this and they're saying this is horrible for the church. Well, no. Catastrophe, right? We're always given the opportunity as a church, as the church militant, to come correct. And so it's an opportunity to get the bad blood out, right? Like they tell young Michael Corleone in The Godfather, like you shake things up, you get the bad blood out, and you move on. So it is okay to admit, like, this is exciting, but what none of us should do, don't wring your hands on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you don't want to be titillated by it. But no one should be developing callous to how odd this is. And I mean, I'm not trying to keep revisiting what we said in the first 5 minutes, but the creepiest aspect of this, besides Pope Francis's words, I will say no words, has been the response by the mainstream media and my kind of unscientific polling. Only about 3 out of 25 Catholic kids that came into my room on Monday or Tuesday even had heard of this.
Right.
The mainstream media's got its finger in the air. This is their guy, was what I told Mike Voris. They got their finger in the air, and they're just basically like, how much are the minor media and the Dr. Taylor Marshalls and the 1 Peter 5s out there going to force us to cover it? Because they're going to do the absolute minimum amount. That's what I think correctly predicted. I think that's what we see playing out.
Yeah, but we're moving into a new age, a new era of communication, and I think it's just now happening. We're probably in the first couple of years of it, where before there was no way to get the message out. You couldn't tweet, you couldn't go on Facebook, you couldn't go on YouTube and do an hour video on something. You couldn't do your own interviews. You were stuck at home and you had 3 TV channels and 1 newspaper, local newspaper, and that was it.
Right.
And one of the things that's happening right now is the bishops themselves do not understand this. I really think that the bishops, especially those who have gotten their tail caught, think they can wait it out and think that they have, the Washington Post in their pocket or the New York Times, and that's enough. And as the years go on, maybe it's not at this moment, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, those major media syndicates are going to diminish and become less important. We've already seen that with the newspapers.
Certainly.
And the organic grassroots voices will become louder. I think that's going to be a good thing for humanity altogether.
Me too.
And now it used to be there was this cardinal archbishop, and you maybe saw him once a year for a confirmation, or maybe he sent one of his auxiliaries. He might as well have been living inside the Vatican walls. You had no access to him. Yeah. Today, you can go on Twitter and say, resign today, and he sees it.
Right.
You have direct access to a cardinal in 2018.
I'll never.
In previous ages, that was never possible.
No. When remember the summer of 2017, when the Pope, who was it? The Pope's right-hand man, Italian name. He's a Monsignor. I'm forgetting. He's considered the mouthpiece of the Pope.
Which one?
I'm forgetting his name.
But
yeah, which one there? No, Francis. When a lot of the James Martin stuff was happening, I'll remember his name later. But he'd said he'd made some obnoxious tweets in defense of James Martin, and I said, you know what? In all due respect, I published a piece at Church Militant, and I called him out on it. And this just illustrates the point you're talking about. And I made a joke about Cardinal Fernandez's book, Heal Me With Your Mouth. And I ended on this disgusting, no one wants to hear that, Phil. And I ended on a joke, and an hour later, he retweeted not Cafaro, he's a good guy. Forgetting who it is, and he's a cardinal anyway. But the Italian names escape me. An hour later, he tweeted out a reference to what I'd just written him on Church Militant. So at that point, the expediency of the technology was really driven home, and I was kind of proud. I'd done this little diss on public record, and it hit home. I was showing all my friends that.
Yeah, I think we're just in the first few years of this.
We are.
And the bishops themselves, who tend to be older, of course, we want older bishops. They're not quite used to this, and they're not quite prepared. It's been also interesting in this controversy since the Pennsylvania grand jury to see bishops issuing press releases.
I know.
No one reads those. Press releases are like so 1980.
They are.
It's you don't do that. If you want to say something, get on YouTube and talk to people.
Right.
Put out a tweet. That's how people are going to communicate and see it. A press release doesn't work. Putting a notice in the bulletin, no one sees that.
But on our side, we have guys like you, like Pat Coffin, like Matt Fradd, the good guys. I mean, I'm not going to give in to the relativist impulse. This is about the struggle against the powers and the principalities, and we have guys with podcasts like you, and that's our strength, and hopefully that continues to burgeon and develop. The weakness that our side has had against those who continue to propagate the crisis in the church from within is that for decades, before I was even born, right, in the 70s and then the 80s, what was the going response by the weak good guys within the church? How are we ever going to turn around the spirit of Vatican II and what it represents, which is much worse than just
not just documents.
Just documents, not even just liturgy, as important as that is. But right. I mean, all of the infiltration of the church by Bella Dodd, by the Masons, the Marxists, the homosexuals. How are we going to do this? What the going story was that debilitated the good guys was they called it the biological solution.
Right.
Wait for these old, spirit of VC2 guys to die. Well, guess what? Guess why the 11th commandment is boldness, to quote Mother Angelica. It's because they're not stupid. They're not going to just die, and they've created, a system of, mentees, and they look at how many appointments have been made into the College of Cardinals.
Yeah.
So we have to fight. That's the point. And
the biological solution is not an answer. That's a weak man. That's like they're at the gates, and you say, well, eventually they'll die.
Right.
No.
Bore them to death.
That doesn't work.
Take a nap. It doesn't work. And we need to, and this is why when I see a show, a podcast, the ones that I choose to watch are the ones with some manliness. We need to go away from not only the homosexuality in the church that everyone's talking about, but the feminism in the church, which is a great turn-off. It's synonymous with original sin, and it turns off all the guys that could be heroes in the clergy or the laity. And that's why people like your podcast. That's why people like Frad's. We need even a little cussing is good. We need some red blood, Yeah. What we want to see,
Yeah. St. Paul used some colorful language. in Galatians, for sure.
In Galatians,
Yeah.
Yep, scubala.
So a lot of people are saying, we can close with this, but a lot of people are saying, well, Pope Francis is going to resign. This is so horrible. I mean, he's obviously just going to resign. I don't think so. I don't think he's going to. They have worked so hard for this pontificate, and the media and the cardinals and so many people in important places have waited and worked so hard. This is what they wanted before John Paul II was elected. Okay,
Right.
This has been a decade-long pursuit. So, do you also think he's not going to resign? He's going to fight this to the bitter end?
What would Perón do? Yeah, get a little base bracelet, right? WWPD. Yeah, yeah. He is a Latin American strongman. Actually, he's fully Italian by blood. Both his mom and his dad.
Yeah, Cardinal Supich says they don't like him because he's a Latino.
Yeah, he's not a
race
Latino.
card. Well, actually, he's Italian.
He's Italian.
Yeah.
But he was raised all his life, and that's what we're talking about anyway, is culture. So let me preempt that Dr. Marshall and I have not been talking about race, but culture this whole time. He had this whole model, and deny, and give creepy answers like, you figure it out, wait for the pulse to die down, and no, he won't. And really, canonically speaking, this is unprecedented. So we can't make him step down. Henry Sire, I feel like he's Master Yoda or something, the way I keep citing him. But Henry Sire
Just for
says,
those who are wondering, he's the author of Dictator Pope.
Right, he's the author of Dictator Pope, and he really is very shrewd at pointing out the Peronist impulses in Francis that seem to be thoroughgoing. And so did some of the newspapers that love him, like Washington Post and LA Times, ran articles with titles like, "If you want to understand Francis, look at Perón." So it's not just Sire who's on the other side of Francis; it's his partisans as well. He said, really, if you want to understand Francis well, you have to understand the temperament, and you also have to understand that, basically, it's a dictatorial impulse. I will never stand down. Attack your attackers. And it's the playbook is being run out. I mean, Monsignor Lanthiome, I don't know how to say his name exactly, but the first guy to really corroborate what Viganò had said as an eyewitness account. He said, I don't want to say anything else, but yes, it's all true. Off the record, he said, and by the way, if you find me cut up into a bunch of little pieces, or I'm found at the bottom of the river wearing concrete shoes, that wasn't suicide.
Yeah,
so
I saw that.
These people mean business, and it's creepy.
That's a joke, but it's also indicative of what's going on, I think.
Okay, yeah, maybe. I mean,
we're using the word creepy a lot in this interview, and I think that kind of sums it up.
I think so. Yes.
Just to close, where do you think Viganò is right now? He went into hiding.
I mean, if it were me, I would pick some spot warm and some spot that I could hang out in for the next 30 years, because they're going to be looking for him. Caribbean? I don't know. Did you read the account of? Oh man, I've been horrible with names today, but it's the account by the Italian blogger that was recounted on 1 Peter 5. It was very touching, where he gave the story of how this was relayed to him.
He gave the report, yeah.
He said, "Goodbye. This is goodbye forever. I'm going away, and I just trashed my cell phone. And these people mean business, like you said, Dr. Marshall. These people mean business." Mario Bergoglio made a run in the conclave, which ended up electing Benedict back in 2004. He made a run, and no one even knew who he was. He was second place, and lots of people before me have speculated, how did he make a run? He nearly had as many votes as Ratzinger. Yeah, it's and of course, look up the St. Gallen Mafia if you don't know what that is out there, viewers. This is very deliberate, and it's the effectuation of a long-standing non-organic plot.
Yeah, and I mean when Viganò was overseeing the Vatican Bank in 2010, there's over $50 million swing from the negative in the red into the surplus. And like I said in a video I released 2 days ago, that's not because Viganò was a great portfolio manager. It's because he brought secret funds, secret accounts into light. So it looked like they had no money, but they did have a ton of money. And then the Italian government seized millions of dollars with the accusation of money laundering. If those things are going on, and then once it came out, there was the butler, and they fired the head of the Vatican Bank. Francis eventually put in, is it Rica or Rico? Can't remember. The infamous homosexual priest.
Rico. Yeah. Rico. Yeah.
And,
but were you suggesting, because that was a great video you did on it, were you suggesting that the Vatican Bank thing, the Vatileaks scandal, the butler was kind of a good guy in it at all? You say
that's
something.
Kind of my guess. I kind of think he is a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if all that stuff's going on, and you're talking about $50 million or maybe even $100 million, I'm talking about lots of money and lots of accounts. That's just not a bunch of monsignors playing with checking accounts.
No.
We're talking about European bankers. We're talking about, in my opinion, organized crime. And with those kind of links and that kind of money, they're in serious political power related to the papacy and these funds and this money. People will die.
Right.
People will get killed. It's not going to be a Monsignor with maybe a dagger in the hallway, but there are people in the shadows, and there have been some sketchy deaths in America and in Rome and overseas, and Swiss guards and all kinds of strange things that have happened.
I know.
So when Viganò says, I'm going into hiding, I've trashed my phone and all that, that's not like being a drama queen. He's not doing this for drama. He's seriously afraid. He was involved in tens of millions of dollars of found money. He was involved in the seizing of money and the accusation of money laundering on the part of the Vatican. He was involved in cover-ups and seeing cover-ups in America with McCarrick.
Yeah.
He has seen some serious criminal activity, sexual and financial. That guy needs to hide because he just blew it open.
Well, and his you have not heard this in the mainstream accounts, but it's worth repeating once. His forerunner in the nunciature, the nuncio, died an odd, untimely death, right?
Pietro
right?
Sambi.
Yeah, Sambi. No one's talking about that. Yeah. I mean, outside of the three extremist news outlets that I'm checking every hour for this, LifeSite, outlets like you. Why is no one talking about that? It was an untimely death. You can go read it.
It's referenced. Isn't it referenced by Viganò in the report?
Yes, that's right. He does, but even he doesn't make that big a deal out of it. He's like, this is Italy. This is how it works. Right. It's creepy. I don't know how many times we've used that term here, but I don't know how you escape saying something like it. And I find the fact that on Wednesday, look, final thought, when all this broke on Saturday, I thought, what the hell? Why is this like a small medium news story? I figured, okay, let the week hit. I don't want to be right in my prediction to Mike Voris, but Monday came and went, and it was just this much bigger of a story. And now it's Wednesday, and I remember thinking on Saturday, this better be a big deal by Wednesday. And it's not. They're waiting to see. They're going to, I don't know. Heaven help us.
Yeah. All right. Well, Timothy Gordon, thanks so much for this interview. And really, I mean, the reason I wanted you on was to talk about Perón, talk about politics, give some people a background to Pope Francis and where he's coming from, maybe to help us understand his activity, his actions, the way he thinks. And then, honestly, we haven't solved the mystery, but this quote he gives on the airplane about, and you have the sufficient journalistic capacity to draw conclusions. Very odd. So anyway, thanks for taking time with us today.
Thanks a lot.
All right,
great,
God
great
bless.
to see you again.
And hey, if you're enjoying these videos, please subscribe and like, and there'll be more to come, I'm sure, as this story changes and transforms in the days and weeks to come. God bless.